All right, Tubi Moloi, an advocate at the Pitjie Chambers, joins me for more on this. A very good afternoon. Thanks so much for your time on SABC News. So let's start with what is an appeal and when are they likely to succeed?
Afternoon, Zina. Thank you for having me, and afternoon to your viewers. An appeal in simple terms is whereby an aggrieved party to litigation basically petitions a higher court to have the order that was against them set aside by that higher court or tribunal. There would have to obviously be prospects of success, and the aggrieved party should highlight whether they are going on, they are petitioning the higher body rather, in terms of law or fact.
Mm-hmm. Let's go back to Judge Keokagile Matojane's decision to set aside the parole. What were his reasons for that?
Well, to set aside the parole, Judge Matojane basically found that the commissioner, Arthur Fraser, at the time, undermined the rule of law. He used his seat as the commissioner to undermine the rule of law, and he usurped the powers of the medical parole board. That was the body the only body actually that had the authority to grant Mr. Zuma the what do we call it, the medical parole. Further thereto, that the commissioner basically took into account irrelevant information at his disposal.
All right. So the department was on SABC News last night saying that they believe that the court interpreted the Correctional Services Act incorrectly, but wouldn't go into further details about what part of the act. Are we able to speculate on what they're going to use on that appeal using that act?
Zina, I do not think that we can speculate. But if I'm pushed for an answer, what jumped out in the judgment by Judge Matojane rather, was the differences in section 75.7, which basically grants the commissioner the powers to grant any inmate serving less than 24-month sentence. Basically, yes, the commissioner can grant that inmate medical parole. However, the judge says that has to be read in line with section 79, which basically gives us the elements, if you will, which are that the inmate must be terminally ill or physically incapacitated. There must be no risk of the inmate reoffending, and basically care for the inmate by his family or society. Now, if you ask me if I'm really pushed for an answer, that would be the basis for the Department of Correctional Services and maybe Mr. Zuma's appeal, because there is a big discrepancy between the two. Can the commissioner grant medical parole, or is it solely a function left for the medical parole, what is it, our authority body?
So just remind us what the effect of appealing a ruling in this instance is. Is former President Jacob Zuma going to spend Christmas at home?
If the appeal has been lodged, which I do not know yet, chances are yes, he will spend Christmas at home. The effect of this appeal would be to suspend Judge Matojane's judgment granted yesterday or handed down yesterday. And in that, one would expect the Department of Correctional Services and Mr. Zuma to prosecute this appeal swiftly. Or not, actually, in the history between Mr. Zuma and his adversaries.
All right, so you've touched on this. I just want to go back to it. The court said that the decision to grant medical parole was irrational, and it failed to consider the other jurisdictional reasons for parole, including Section 79, which you've just spoken about, which says that the risk of reoffending must be low. Was there another way that the commissioner could have granted former President Zuma parole outside of medical parole and used the powers that he has, perhaps just not with a medical parole?
The short answer is it's a no, Zinga. the commissioner could have used other provisions in the legislation. However, in terms of medical parole, there are no other provisions. Could the commissioner have granted Mr. Zuma parole in due time? Perhaps. The judgment goes on to say that, or rather, yes, the judgment looking at the commissioner's reasons say that I believe it's Mr. Zuma was up for parole in about 7 weeks from the time that he was granted medical parole. So no, there was no other provision for medical parole. However, within that 7 weeks or after that, he could have been granted other forms of parole, yes.
Okay. Advocate Tubi Moloi from the Pitjie Chambers, thanks so much for your time and insight. As usual, really appreciate having you on the show this afternoon.
Thanks for having me. Happy holidays.